The Tokachi region of Hokkaido, one of the largest agricultural regions of Japan. Through state-of-the-art agricultural techniques and large-scale mechanization, Tokachi has become the largest food supply base in the country. But the modernization of Tokachi agriculture would not have been possible without the work of some great leaders throughout its history. Toshinobu Aritsuka is the president of the Obihiro Kawanishi Agricultural Cooperative. He is a leader who carries on the spirit of Tokachi agriculture and is the storyteller for this video.
リーダーっていうのはやっぱり、お互いに協調を求める包容の力がなかったらですね、そういうものがあって初めて、人から尊敬される。人っていうのはやっぱり人を育てる環境もこれ必要でないでしょうか。
This story begins around 150 years ago. Hokkaido, an island that had flourished with the culture of the Ainu natives for centuries, was undergoing a wave of reclamation. In the Tokachi region, it was a group of civilians with a modern-age education that first came to settle the land. Each one of them had to become a leader as they paved their own roads through virgin areas, eventually developing the land into one of the largest agricultural regions in Japan. This is a story about the leaders who have inherited this pioneering spirit as they commit themselves to a life entwined in agriculture. Spreading to the east of the Hidaka mountain range, known as the backbone of Hokkaido, is the Tokachi Plain and its central city of Obihiro. In 1883, under the leadership of a young man named Benzo Yoda, a group of pioneers called Benseisha arrived in this place. In their grueling efforts to cultivate the land they obtained as a grant from the government, they faced the menace of nature, such as severe weather and crop damage from wild animals. This hindered the progress of their work, and they also had to deal with dwindling food supplies. But Benzo and his group never gave up. They kept trying new things, including raising livestock, using draft horses in the farms, and even attempting to manufacture starch and butter. What was it that gave Benzo and the other pioneers the strength to overcome their difficulties? Aritsuka-san believes that there was a spiritual culture unique to Tokachi.
要するにこの十勝っていうのは異質な気質があると言われておりますけれども、これは縄文時代から伝わる精神文化と言いましょうか、アイヌ文化と言いましょうか、精神文化、チャレンジ精神と言いましょうかね、そういったことだと思っております。
The Ainu are an indigenous people in Hokkaido who have always lived a lifestyle of coexistence with nature. It was the Ainu who supported the Benseisha settlers as they faced desperate conditions, with many members having given up and returning home. They helped Benzo and the others in various tasks, such as building huts, clearing the forests, weeding and sowing the fields, and harvesting the crops. This friendly cooperation was recorded in the journals of the Benseisha settlers. Last night, the Ainu called Takasuro stayed with us. He brought us 15 salmon fish. So we will make a place for drying them.
開拓農民でありますから、爆根でありますとか木を倒しますとか、大怪我をする時があるんですね。そういった時にはですね、アイヌの医療文化、樹液って言いましょうかね、そういうものあるんですよ。取ってあるんですね。そういったものをですね、つけるだとか、昔はやけどなんていうのはたくさんあったんですね。そういった時には狩猟民族のアイヌから分けてもらったですね、熊の油をですね、そのやけどの場所に塗るだとか、全部アイヌの医療文化に支えられて、ずっと昭和の初期までは来ておりましたですね。昭和の初期までですよ。
The settlers also drew strength from another source to overcome their hardships: It was the spirit of companionship they brought with them from their own distant hometowns.
5月に雪が降ったり、それからもう大冷害でもう何一つものが取れんかったり、空を黒く埋めたっていうバッタな集団、そういう害虫が発生したりですね、いわゆる辞めていく移住者がたくさんいたわけです。そういった跡地がですね、私らが一緒に入ってきた仲間がですね、次から次と呼び寄せたといいましょうか、郷里郷愁の念を持った者同士がですね、体を寄せ合って、そして体温を温め合って、五条の精神といいましょうかね、本当に、共存共栄で、来ているというのが現状でしょうか。
Pioneering is a struggle with nature, and the settlers had to face it with their own hands. This was especially true for the Tokachi region, which was pioneered by civilian groups. Most of the land belonged to absentee landowners, so many of the settlers had to borrow the land and work as tenant farmers. These farmers came to value something as much as their lives, their tools, and their horses.
その当時はですね、馬なんていうのは一頭持ってればもう本当にトラクターを1台持った異常のですね、力があったんじゃないでしょうか。ほとんど人力で自分の手でですね開拓をしていったと、桑の手でね。その当時はですね、小さな集落に必ず鍛冶屋っていうのがね一軒ずつはありましたですね。畑を作るのはこの桑、そういったものみんな鍛冶屋です。それから馬が入ってきますから、馬に引かせる馬の力を借りた、農耕の農機具の歴史、こういったものをですね全部人間のもう頭の知恵から農機具が作られてきております。
Initially, the settlers made use of an indigenous horse breed called Dosanko. Later on, with the Japanese government's initiative to make Hokkaido a region of large-scale agriculture, the Tokachi National Stud Horse Farm was established to breed farming horses, and large Percheron draft horses were imported from Europe. These horses were used to pull new farming implements such as plows and harrows, greatly aiding the work of the settlers. Despite the help of the horses in tilling the land, Hokkaido's cool climate allowed the settlers to grow only a few kinds of crops. One of the most common crops produced was legumes such as beans and peas. In the 1920s, around 40 years since Benzo Yoda first arrived, the Tokachi agricultural industry experienced an unprecedented economic boom. With the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, most of Europe became engulfed in conflict, greatly affecting their agricultural output. This paved the way for the large-scale export of Tokachi beans to Europe.
ほとんどね、開拓地でありますから、非常に今の地力と違ってですね、豆を連作してでもですね、結構ですね、取れるんですね。帯広にですね、雑貨の仲買人の町がですね、鉄道のあるところにできたわけですね。
Benzo Yoda did not live to see this prosperity, having died in 1925 after a life of hardship. On his deathbed, he is said to have uttered the following words: "Nothing will remain of the Benseisha, but for the Tokachi plain." His words proved prophetic, as Tokachi was on its way to becoming the center of modern agriculture in Japan. It was not long after that Japan plunged itself into global conflict. The outbreak of the Pacific War in 1941 drastically changed the lives of the Japanese.
軍需物資として、アルコールを作らないかんわけですね。そのアルコールを作るのにはですね、まず馬鈴薯、 これをですね強制的にですね、バレー省が尽くされました。かぼちゃでも芋でも全部もう食べ物一切ですね統制でありまして、個人で売っちゃったらですね直ちに手錠をかかって、刑務所へ連れていかれると、そういう時代です。
After Japan's defeat in the war, its society was plunged into chaos and poverty. Conscription and compulsory supply during the war led to a labor shortage and dilapidated fields in Tokachi farms. And the area of abandoned farmland rose to 30%. In 1946, the Japanese government implemented an agrarian reform that allowed it to purchase the lands owned by absentee landlords and sell them back to tenant farmers who had been farming it. Tenants who were previously burdened with exorbitant rents now got to possess their own lands. The Tokachi agricultural industry gradually recovered from the post-war chaos. Even though their farmlands were small, farmers could freely cultivate crops as they pleased. However, they also had to handle crop growth management and product shipment all by themselves. Unable to cultivate their farmlands properly, some farmers chose to abandon their lands or even return to tenant farming. In order to tackle the various issues faced by individual farmers, it became apparent that a unifying body was necessary. The farming town of Shihoro, located to the north of Obihiro, is home to JA Shihoro, the largest agricultural cooperative in Tokachi in terms of transaction value. This cooperative would not have come into existence without the efforts of a man who was born in a settler's home in Obihiro. His name was Kanichi Ota, and he was one of the most charismatic leaders of Tokachi agriculture. In 1935, Ota joined an industrial union aimed at co-prosperity and mutual aid. Toshinobu Aritsuka describes Ota's personality as follows.
いやいや、雰囲気はね、やっぱり人を引っ張っていく雰囲気ですから、やっぱり柔らかく感じ、時にはですね、どんなくしてもこれは成し遂げないかんっていう一つのですね、説得力もありますし、やっぱりそれだけ人格、執権、包容力、全てがですね、備わってないとカリスマっていうにはこれにならんのですよね。
After the war in 1946, it came to Ota's attention that local potato farmers were being forced to sell their produce cheaply to a starch factory. So he decided to have the farmers acquire the factory for themselves. Under the direct management of the newly established Shihoro Agricultural Association, the factory bought the potatoes at a fair price, ensuring that the farmers obtained proper profits. In 1947, a new law dissolved agricultural associations and turned them into agricultural cooperatives. These cooperatives took on the roles initiated by Ota, including produce collection, processing, farm guidance, low-cost supply of fertilizers and agrochemicals, and credit services. With farmers working together to ensure a stable business for all members, it was truly the embodiment of co-prosperity and mutual aid. Naturally, it was Ota who became the president of the Shihoro Agricultural Cooperative.
どんどんと共同活動に熱心になり、構造改善事業ではいち早くですね、でんぷん工事の再編を求めて、十勝のリーダー的な役割を果たして、組合員が主人公であるから、その主人公の所得をたくさんに取れるような仕組みをするのが農協だということでですね、いわゆる今でいう独自化産業にですね、走っていっているわけです。
In the 1960s, Japan experienced a phenomenal economic boom, with an annual growth rate of 10% as it marched towards becoming an industrialized nation. Since the government invested more in heavy industries, People in rural areas moved to the big cities to work in large-scale factories. In Hokkaido, many farmers who did not experience improved economic conditions chose to abandon their farms for more lucrative jobs.
農村電化というのがありまして、それもですね、農村に、乏しみのような電気も入ってきて、ラジオも聴けるようになってきたと同時に、腹いっぱい、かぼちゃでもいいもので自由に食べれるようになったと。そこからですね、大量の旋風が起こるんですよ。これでは大変だと。国もですね、こんなことやっとったらまた食料になってしまうし、自立性を失うと。そういったことから、構造改善事業っていうのを始めたわけです。十勝にありました約5200ヘクタールの水田、これをですね畑にしちゃおうと、そんなことがその時にですね基盤整備事業っていうのがですね、国営で、どんどんと、やるようになってまいりましたですね。
In cold or mountainous areas where paddy or upland fields were not suitable, dairy farming was introduced. Henceforth, every region in Hokkaido came to focus on either upland farming, paddy field farming, or dairy farming, in accordance with their climate and geographic features. This kind of distribution of agricultural production that was born out of adversity would later serve to strengthen the foundation of Tokachi agriculture.
例えば畑の場合はですね、完全な寒地農業の輪作体系を作らないかんと、そこで十勝はですね、寒地農業の中にビートとですね、寒冷に強い、バレー種を織り込んでいきましょうという形態が今の農業なんです。
In order to optimize the crop rotation system that included potatoes and sugar beets, starch factories and sugar mills were established, along with other infrastructure developments initiated by the national government. The initiatives pioneered by Kanichi Ota were now expanding throughout the region. Kanichi Ota's next big project aimed to rectify an issue faced by dairy farmers: the low and unstable price of milk, which was determined by big manufacturers. For this, he decided to create a new dairy company by and for local dairy farmers. His aim was to reflect the collective will of the dairy producers regarding price and product quality by integrating everything from production to distribution and sales. He believed that farmers should not only produce, but also process their products to add value and sell them at their own price. His plan came to fruition in 1967 with the establishment of a dairy company capitalized by local farmers. Ota famously declared the following words: "This farmer's factory to be built in Tokachi holds much significance for the Hokkaido dairy industry. I will commit my life to seeing this project through to its completion."
今大手さんが生きとったらどんなことを言い出すでしょうかね。そういう先駆的ないわゆる農業のこの改革者であったと、指導者であったという印象ですね。
There was another charismatic leader who was born in a settler's home in Tokachi. He was a politician named Ichiro Nakagawa. Born to a dairy farming family in 1925 during the heyday of Tokachi beans. He went to an agricultural high school in Tokachi before attending the Kyushu Imperial University School of Agriculture. He later joined the Hokkaido Development Agency. His work as a secretary for the agency's director general revealed his potential as a politician.
中川家っていうのはものすごい、教育の熱心なうちですね。8人の子供がおりますけれども、そのうち全部教育をみんな受けておりますね。非常になんちゅうか豪快な反面ですね、神経質的な そういう面も凄惨な面も持っておりますから、武士道みたいな精神を持った男だったんですね。
He learned the ins and outs of politics as a legislator's secretary and was elected to the House of Representatives himself in 1963. Incidentally, it was right at the time when Hokkaido agriculture was facing a crisis, as farmers were quitting in large numbers. Nakagawa quickly made his mark in politics, being appointed to important positions, including Minister of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries in 1977, and head of the Science and Technology Agency in 1980. Like Kanichi Ota, Nakagawa knew what it was like to come from a poor farming family. He believed that it was the national government that should take the lead in order to improve the conditions for farmers.
やっぱり十勝はね、正当なですね、精神文化が伝承されておりますから、向かうぞ、へこたれんぞと、そういうことですから、言ってみると貧乏農家からでも立候補した、そういった面ではですね、やはり政治まで改革しようとして活躍した人だと思いますね。
If Kanichi Ota was a leader who implemented frontline agricultural reforms for individual farmers, Ichiro Nakagawa was a leader who put his heart and soul into legal reforms to help advance the agricultural industry. What spurred these great leaders is the pioneering spirit etched in the heart of Tokachi farmers. And it was also the driving force for Toshinobu Aritsuka. In 1993, Aritsuka became president of JICA Obihiro Kawanishi, building on the foundations of sixth sector industrialization laid down by Kanichi Ota and the agricultural infrastructure and legal reforms realized by Ichiro Nakagawa. Aritsuka and others like him have taken the local agricultural industry to the next stage. This includes attracting investment from large corporations and the overseas export of Tokachi produce. They succeeded in attracting a major food manufacturer to build a local factory for processing potatoes, one of the 4 major crops in Tokachi's crop rotation system. This factory was completed in 1997. In 1999, they also started the overseas export of nagaimo, Chinese yam produced in Tokachi. Later, they were able to register Tokachi Kawanishi Nagaimo as a regional collective trademark.
ここでやっぱり、企業を設立してもらって、共に、輪作体系の中で生きる承継のパートナーとしての位置づけ、その方がですね、組合も助かるだろうと、そういったことでですね、カルビーが位置づかれてるんだなと、そういうふうに思っております。外国の信頼関係を取るためには、あらゆるですね、世界で認められることをやっていかないかんということでですね、長芋工場はですね、世界の中で一番いわゆる安心安全のグローバルハサップの認定工場を取りました。農協の役割っていうのはやはりきちっとしたビジョンを立てながら、若者に夢を持たせると、こういったことがですね、一つの十勝の農業の展望だと思っておりますし、この共通認識でですね、今十勝の農協は24農協、十勝は一つということでですね、やはり昔から伝わるですね、体を寄せ合ってお互いに体温を温め合う共同の総合扶助の力かなと、そう思っております。やっぱり奉仕の精神と共同のこの調和能力といいましょうか、そういうものがあって初めて、人から尊敬される。でその仕事をずっとやり抜いていく、成功していくわけですから、それをカリスマ的なリーダーというんでありましょうか。